So last year, if you ask someone about the biggest technology advance in the last 50 years, they probably mention the internet, the personal computer, cellular phones, maybe social media. This year, at least all your nerdy friends might say GPT, or more specifically, ChatGPT. Hey there, I'm your host, Ray Villalobos, a software engineer and senior staff instructor at LinkedIn Learning. And today I'm talking to Logan Kilpatrick. He's a member of the developer advocate staff at OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT. Logan is also a lead advocate for Julia, one of the world's fastest programming languages, and fastest growing, which focuses on data science and machine learning. And they have a super slick just-in-time compiler. I got to check that out. So AI is heating up right now. Logan, talk about the things that interested you in OpenAI as a company and maybe what you think that got you the job from their perspective.
Yeah, that's a good question, Ray, and thanks for having me. Before OpenAI, I was at a company called Path AI where they were using machine learning for digital pathology, which is the study of disease. And before then, I was a machine learning engineer at Apple. So have been sort of transitioning slowly over time into this, the sort of current role that I have right now, which is the perfect mix between machine learning technology and sort of developers and supporting the developer ecosystem. And it's a lot of the similar work to what I've done in the Julia community as far as helping sort of expand that ecosystem. And obviously in the case of OpenAI, it's been a little bit easier because there's so much excitement around ChatGPT and this technology now. So it's less so about my role is less so about like expanding the pie as far as people who know about this technology and more so about helping people who do know about it be successful today. And that it takes a lot of time and it's also a ton of fun.
So how did you hear about the opportunity at OpenAI? Did they recruit for you, or was it something that somebody recommended to you, or, how did that sort of came into being?
Yeah, literally just applied online. I think I was looking at the time for something to be like a little bit closer to the technical action.
Hmm.
I had sort of stepped away when I left Apple and I was training machine learning models every day. I really wanted to be sort of one level abstracted away from that. And when I transitioned to Path AI, I was sort of a couple levels abstracted away from that and was trying to get something that was a little bit closer back down to like the technical action and just found OpenAI. And I was like, yeah, I deeply believe in this mission of helping create artificial general intelligence that's going to benefit all of humanity, and was lucky enough to make it through the interview process and all that stuff.
That's amazing. I think just applying online is sometimes overrated. Like people think, no, I got to know somebody. So that's how I got to my original job at lynda.com. I actually applied 3 times. And that's one of the things I always tell people. Like if you didn't get there the first time, don't think that that's a no. Sometimes, and the story is that the third time, what I did is I tried to, with us, you do basically a pitch for a course. And so, like, I always say the third time, what I did is I pitched something that I thought they wanted as opposed to something that I wanted. And so that made, I think, like the difference. You spoke about, I think that they were able to see your excitement about AI and what you were doing, correct?
Yeah, and I'll make the slight caveat statement as well that like I totally agree with you. I think we could jump into a bunch of career advice and I'll try to steer away from that. But like it really is in my mind the difference maker for a lot of people to like do the thing that they want to do versus not. Like
Hmm.
Apple, for example, I was working part time at the Apple Store and trying to apply for a full time role at like doing software engineering, and I ended up applying like 503 times over the
Wow.
course of like 2.5 years, and got one interview, which led to my one internship at Apple, which led to my full time job. And I oftentimes have conversations with folks, and they're like, "Yeah, well, I applied once or twice or even 3 times, and it didn't work out." And I'm like, it might actually end up taking that 503 times. You never know.
Wow.
So if it's what you want to do, you just have to stick with it.
Yeah, I think that if you get to the point where it's more of, I know that I could do a fantastic job, like yourself, so you feel like, I know that if they just were able to talk to me, and I don't know anybody, so I don't have any special connections, sometimes that makes it easier. But I think that that ability to go, they just need to talk to me. And what was funny is that I pitched something completely different than what I ended up doing. Because again, once they talk to you, they recognize, oh, okay, there's a lot more that we could do here with the potential. So actually probably the best part of the podcast we're going to have is letting people know 500. Did you say 501 or 4?
503. I still have it in my
503.
profile. Yeah, I'm like, I
That
can
is
never. Yeah.
fantastic. That's excellent. So usually what I do is I run a poll on the website so to make it a little more interactive. So I ran this poll this week and I think that I failed here because I thought I was really smart with this communications infrastructure option here. But for some reason it only got like 3%. But basically the question was, what do you think developers need the most to make OpenAI the best platform to work on? And just asking third-party developers is usually the audience that sort of follows me. So solid documentation. Oh, it's weird to me that they're all kind of about the same percentage, except for that communication infrastructure. I feel like I didn't describe it well enough. I think
Yeah.
that
What did you?
documentation is. Yeah, I think like the ability for people to give you feedback. Like I've seen some of the things that you do on Twitter, like a way for communicating. I think a lot of times people get frustrated because they don't know where to ask a question, and you maybe you get to like your the documentation place, and maybe you have an account question, you don't know where to go, so you ask like the wrong question in the wrong place. So I think that was my original intent of the question. But what do you think about the result here? I think that I see things like, for me, obviously, documentation is almost number one. That's something that you clearly are improving and working on. Sample code and tutorials, you guys do that very well. And I would have thought that just please open up the access to the API. I like that you guys are being questioned, but people really want to get in there. So what do you think?
Yeah, this resonates with me a ton. I think from how I spend my time on a day to day basis, it's a lot, and we'll talk more about this later. But it's a lot of focusing on documentation, focusing on creating tutorials and sample code for people so that they can understand how to get up to speed as fast as possible. So this probably a majority of the time I spend doing that. The communications infrastructure piece, I agree. People were probably slightly confused by the wording, but I do think
Hmm.
that implicitly a lot of people have this challenge right now, which is like, hey, I'm having this problem or I have this question. Like, how do I actually get in touch with the team at OpenAI to have them answer the question? And I think the reality right now is like you see me potentially doing some of this on Twitter and LinkedIn, and that's not the ideal state for what we would want. Like, really, we want this amazing self-serve developer experience and support
Hmm.
experience. And the fact that I have to do some of this right now, I think speaks to the fact that we're not doing an incredible job at that, and it's hopefully something that will improve over the short term. And same with opening up access to the API. Like obviously, in a perfect world, we would have everyone access to do all the things that they want to do. There's just a tremendous amount of constraints around a lot of this stuff
Hmm.
with respect to like capacity to give everyone access and stuff like that, and a lot of safety considerations as well.
Yeah, I totally get it, and I really love the heart of the company. You guys are trying to do things in a very responsible way. Much more so than say the opening up of like just a regular Twitter API or any other API. This has a lot of ramifications. What you do can really change the sort of the path of mankind in the future. Um, and you just have to be careful. But people are so excited that I think they they just want to get in. I know, I felt like that. But the tools that you guys already have, the website itself, and then you guys have things like these examples that you have on the site where you have a lot of different things. The playground is pretty cool. A place that looks a little bit different than the regular Chat GPT, where you have like the access to like all of the different models and the versions of the models. Those are all things that you guys are doing well already. So kudos to you, but there's already a lot of stuff there. So I think part of my purpose with the communications infrastructure is a lot of times people just don't know where to go or where to find things. I'm biased in that I like video tutorials, so maybe some of that, I know that you're working on some of that as well. So I think that not everybody learns the same way. Some people like to read, take documentation. I don't mind it at all. As a matter of fact, I think that most of the time when I'm building things, it's with some sort of, a lot of times the courses that I build come from just reading the docs. But, sometimes people want a little bit, I don't know, a better interface, perhaps, is the way that you could say it. So, yeah, I appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things in the news. Basically, a few weeks ago, OpenAI released GPT-4. Can you talk a little bit about the differences between what happened and what was GPT-3 and GPT-4, and why you think maybe that it's so exciting?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think it's such an incredible opportunity. So, just from the sort of historical perspective on the different versions of GPT that have been released over the years, started back with GPT-2, GPT-3 when it came out. That was the first model that was available via the OpenAI API. So we actually opened up access to that model for people to build on top of using our API. And that was, I think, like 2.5+ years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then more recently with GPT 3.5 coming out at the same time as, or GPT 3.5 with specifically the model that powers Chat GPT became available at the beginning of March, actually, which is crazy. And very shortly after that, we released GPT-4, which had been in training for a long time and had actually finished training. And we had just been sort of working on all the safety and post-training stuff for the last, I forgot whether it's like 6 months or something like that. It says in the blog post. So really sort of a lot of stuff that had been in the works for a long time becoming available in a short period of time. And I think people have this perspective that like, if, maybe the model finishes training and then you just press deploy and it goes out to the world. And the reality is, yeah, there's so much more stuff that happens behind the scenes after the actual model is done training. So that's where some of that like lag time comes from. But GPT-4 is sort of, again, the next step for these GPT models. It's able to do a lot of things that GPT 3.5 wasn't sort of perfectly suited to do. I think the two things that come to my mind as far as what are the major differentiators. One is that
Mm-hmm.
GPT-4 will be multimodal, so you can actually input images and things like that. And the model will understand that in addition to text, and it'll give you text out. That's something that wasn't previously possible with our general GPT models. So it's super exciting to like see that actually come to fruition. It's not available yet via the API, but we showed a demo of this during the GPT-4 developer live stream. So it was
Mm-hmm.
awesome to see people's reaction to that. The other thing is overall, the ability for GPT-4 to understand complex instructions and actually follow them is significantly better than what the model was able to do with GPT 3.5. If you go and like give some long verbose list of things that you want the model to do with 3.5, it will actually have a hard time doing that. With GPT-4, it pretty much nails it, which is incredible to see. Like I've been playing around so much with like very complicated like requirements. Like I want this code, I want it to do X, Y, and Z things. I want it to use X, Y, and Z packages. And the model's able to do all of that in large part because of this increased sort of reasoning ability, which you actually see in the article that's being shown here, the blog post from when we released GPT-4. We
Mm-hmm.
tested GPT-4 on all these different benchmarks, all these different tests that humans take, and to see sort of the comparison between GPT 3.5 and GPT 4. And you can see that GPT 4 blows it out of the water in a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
tests compared to 3.5, which is so crazy to see.
Yeah, the bar exam. Lawyers,
Yeah,
listen up.
the bars are great. The bar is a great example of this, like complicated, a lot of like nuance
Hmm.
in like the legal space, and GPT-4 is able to sort of reason through that nuance, which I think is super exciting to see.
Yeah, it's so all these improvements are fantastic. There's a lot of concern, from people about some of these things. My daughter's visiting, and her husband is a teacher at a school, and everybody's just trying to figure out, all right, so what does that mean? Because what we normally do to test people's education is test them on maybe writing, and I would still want to be able to make sure that people can communicate and write, but when, this thing is just passing every test, and is able to write really good things, I mean, what does that do? What should I tell my son-in-law now? What do you think, Logan?
Yeah, there's a bunch of angles to this. I think one angle is that it's true that these models are very powerful and they can do a lot of things that was previously reserved to like only humans being able to do that. Um, and I do think that sort of induces a little bit of fear in people sometimes when technology can do things that it wasn't able to do previously. Um, I think for the specific educational context, you'll actually see the value of these models being specifically in the education space, one of the most impactful areas in a positive sense. And I think the best example of this is Khan Academy actually was one of our launch partners for GPT-4, and they've been working behind the scenes for many months, actually integrating GPT-4 into their platform to help teach people, or to actually help provide a world-class tutor for every student in the world. And that's something that wasn't possible before, completely out of the question. If you're someone who's low income in the United States or abroad, you're likely not going to be able to benefit from this technology, except Khan Academy is sort of bringing it to the masses, which I think is so exciting and so important. Will this impact like tests and some of the things that teachers have to like change the way that they test? Yes, 100%. Do the benefits of having this world-class tutoring technology that can help teach you any concept in the world that you want to know outweigh those changes that teachers might have to make? In my opinion, yes. I think this is something that is like part of a broader conversation, and people have to make this decision for themselves. And the way Khan Academy is using this technology is actually an incredible example of how you might go about integrating this into an educational workspace. Like they do a bunch of things where like the way that Khan Academy has GPT-4 set up, it actually doesn't just give you the answer. So if you say, hey, like, what's the answer to this question? It's on my homework, for example. It's not going to give you the answer. It's going to help walk you through the intuition and sort of set you up for success without sort of just, again, giving you a direct answer, which is the perfect use of this technology in the educational space.
Yeah, and I think the communications infrastructure that I so brilliantly tried to talk about is part of that. Like
Yeah.
communicating that this can be actually super helpful if you can, create an environment where you are able to help people learn, and that's really everybody's goal, helping people learn. Then this can actually be a tool that can really assist you in doing the things. We just have to rethink what you thought of as the learning part of learning. It's not the essay. It's that people able to absorb the content that you are asking them to learn. And if you improve retention, if you improve absorption, then that is really learning. I mean, people have been using things to write their essays for them or using other people. Maybe that's not the part that you need to be focusing on. But I think people do struggle with figuring out, how to rethink education. Super happy that you chose Khan Academy because you could see that they really are trying to do the right thing. I also love in your, in here in the OpenAI website that the new GPT is able to process images. This is like mind blowing for me. The ability to see these images and understand why something is funny, that blew me away when I saw it, Logan.
It's actually something that I don't think we as humans have like seen a great example of this in practice until you see
Mhm.
this technology for yourself, being able to like very precisely describe what's happening in an image and like the nuance of it. I don't think that was something that like 2 years ago people would have understood. And
Mhm.
in general, this isn't that groundbreaking for like me and you, for example, in a lot of cases. But for somebody who's visually impaired, perhaps, like this is the difference from them. Like, yeah, it just opens up so many opportunities for all these different groups of people around the world, and I think that's the most exciting. So for example, this multimodal capability, the ability to add images, is specifically in trial access with one specific partner, Be My Eyes, who provide
Hmm.
this technology to people who have low or no vision in order to like help them navigate through the world. And before this technology, they would like match you up in real time with a volunteer who would like look at the image of what you're showing them on your phone and like actually type out and like help you understand what you were in front of or what you couldn't actually see. And now you just have this technology which can do it for you in real time, which is so crazy to think about. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, what's really interesting and I think amazing and beautiful is that I don't know how many people, and I don't know if this includes uh, the people at OpenAI, how many people expected a computer to be able to do these things. Like, I would have never guessed that it would be able to understand what makes something funny. Sometimes I don't know what makes some, like when my dad tells a joke, like often you don't even know what he's talking about. Like that wasn't even funny. You heard of dad jokes before. And, just the computer can understand humor. Like I would have never expected that. And then, there's additional things like the ability to understand a photo or a printout or some sort of graph that is not in textual form, even if it was like the ability to make calculations from the data. That is just unbelievable. Those are some of the things that blew me away. And you mentioned, I think, steerability and the ability of GPT-4 to maybe set itself up into Socratic tutor mode, where it's instead of just giving you the answers like you mentioned in Khan Academy, it's actually asking you to solve the problem. And isn't that what you're trying to achieve? Uh, you know, from people, like what you're trying to get from people is really the learning, and just connect that with the ability of computers to also do lots of other things like track people's progress and be able to not give somebody an answer, but allow them to uh, continue to work. People learn at different speeds and different modes. So the ability to customize the learning to the individual to bring everybody forward. Some people get things right away. Some people just need a little bit more help. They may need some auditory help. You talked about the company. I think you mentioned, is it Be My Eyes? I think you said
Be My
that.
Eyes, yeah, it's a
Yeah, that,
nonprofit entity.
yeah. I mean, those kind of things are just benefits that I didn't expect, and that now are available. So another thing that I thought was pretty interesting was, I don't know if you have seen this picture before. This is the famous GPT-3 had 175 billion a sort of pieces of data. And so maybe GPT-4, I don't even know what this number is when this is like 100
100 trillion.
trillion,
Yeah.
quadrillion. Yes. And what I thought was really interesting is I was watching Sam's interview with Lex Fridman, and Lex actually said that this graph came from a presentation that he gave in school, and that it was completely taken out of context. And really great interview. Everybody should go check this out. And basically, I think maybe people think that just by throwing more parameters at GPT that it would get smarter. I often thought, even with ChatGPT 3, that isn't necessarily, you know, solving a lot. What can you say about sort of that misconception that just getting like bigger and bigger models is going to solve everything? And
I
yeah.
Yeah, I do think in part that is so. OpenAI's approach, and it's something that folks have given backlash on from a research standpoint. But um, the thought process was really like, okay, we're very clear that this technology works. And I was listening to some interviews with some of the co-founders of OpenAI, and they talked about this, that like as soon as like all the way back with GPT-2 and GPT-3, they sort of knew that this was a viable solution for what we were trying to do. The question of is like, where is the ceiling? Where does the improvement stop coming? And I don't think that we've sort of seen, and I guess you can see this with GPT-4, where like it's continued to improve. and there's sort of no end in sight to that, if you will. Uh, and GPT-4 is actually the first model. We were talking off camera before this, but GPT-4 is the first model where OpenAI was actually able to predict the capabilities of this model beforehand, which gives us sort of great insight into like what the future of these models might look like. And my gut feel is that it will continue to just be like in the short term a lot of models that just get bigger. Um, yeah,
Yeah, so if
for
it's
better or for worse, like something's working. Like why it's worth sort of continuing that line of thinking until it hits the end of what's possible. And I don't think we've hit the end of what's possible with just making bigger models yet.
yeah, I think that's why people are so interested in what happened with GPT-4, and that what we're seeing is a lot of things that people weren't expecting out of AI, which is what makes it, I think, beautiful. And like this is GPT-4. Like it's got a long way to go. So what does like GPT-10, GPT-20 look like? And the pace just seems to be accelerating as we start adding now more real time sort of data, more the models that are able to use more focused sort of data that is specializes in certain sort of things. So, we've seen advances in medicine, for example, is a good example where if the data is now trained on a certain subset of the human, uh, you know, biome, then it's going to be able to do things in that arena that we're not seeing ChatGPT do right now because it's really a chat application. I really love this tweet that you put up on Twitter just the other day, and it says, "You heard it. The first real YouTube competitor will be a Chat GPT plugin." So that was one of kind of the big announcements that happened recently, and that was really bold. You got a lot of retweets and likes and quotes on this, and I'm sure you've heard quite a bit on Twitter. Can you talk a little bit about that bold statement and why you think that that will be the case?
Yeah, I'm super optimistic about what plugins will enable ChatGPT users to do. And my gut feel is that, a lot of the previous ways of doing things have the opportunity to be disrupted in some capacity. And I think one of those is, there's such a big opportunity with video content and changing the way that people consume video content and engage with video content. And then ultimately, at some point in the future, like being able to generate your own video content using AI. I just think that I don't know who's going to build this sort of YouTube competitor that's ChatGPT plugins native, but I'm
Hmm.
optimistic that somebody will. And if you can provide a incredible chat first experience with like all these features and functionality that just don't exist in YouTube today, I think
Today, I'm
somebody
going to
might
show
actually
you.
have a real, yeah, so might actually have a real opportunity to compete and get people over into the platform. I also think that like the cool part would be if your YouTube competitor ChatGPT plugin sort of brings that video functionality into ChatGPT for all the users so that you don't have to leave and like go into a separate platform and like do all this other stuff. Like keeping it inside of ChatGPT will be a different experience than like just you going to YouTube and like browsing videos and stuff like that. And I also think that you could probably get like much more focused content that's like specifically useful for you. Like what I'd really want is, again, if somebody could build something where it like cuts out some of the fluff, like you could
Hmm.
essentially take some video that's out there and like skip all the stuff that's unrelated and uninteresting to you and just like see the version of the video that like has the content that you're excited about. I think that could be something as well that like just taking that would work with existing YouTube today. You could just
Hmm.
sort of use the text to speech API and then analyze that text and then like figure out what somebody's looking for and then in real time like show them the parts of the video that are most interesting to them. And that stuff's not possible with YouTube today.
Yeah, so you mentioned companies like Khan Economy And you also mentioned Be My Eyes. Those are some pretty amazing examples of companies just doing some, again, work that you didn't kind of expect would be happening so quickly. Is there any other examples of things that you've seen out there that really kind of make you happy besides, we might all be working on a lot of YouTube competitors now that you've opened the floodgates?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's actually influenced anyone to create a YouTube competitor, but
Oh,
hopefully
somebody's
somebody's
thinking about it.
working on
Trust
it.
me.
I hope so. So I think one of the cool partners that probably doesn't get a ton of attention, that were part of the initial set of plugins, is a company called Milo. Milo, Milo. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but they actually provide like support for um, helping parents like understand and like I think you can pull up the actual plugin and give the best phrasing of what they do, but
Hmm.
essentially support for parents through this chat interface. And I think that, like, again, such an interesting use case and something that doesn't like what doesn't come to my mind as like the biggest problem that people have, but I still think that with AI, this is like a very interesting opportunity for them to solve something and like probably learn a bunch of really cool stuff that's also useful for people generally. So I'm excited to see um, what they end up building and how useful this is to people. And they're one of the initial plugin partners through ChatGPT. So if you have access, you can check it out.
That's pretty amazing. Yes, if you've read my Twitter bio, I have 8 children, so some still pretty young. So I gotta check this out. And it's just,
Eight
it's so
children.
like, yes, total 8 children. A lot of them are adults now, so I have grandchildren now. So, but I mean, I could really relate to it. When I saw the grocery list sort of part of the demo. I'm like, that is like my nemesis is the grocery list. So anybody that can build something to improve, because I actually do all the groceries in the house, and it's always like a struggle. I love that somebody, I think it was The Verge put up a demo that showed somebody taking a photo of their fridge, and
Yeah.
ChatGPT was able to tell them what to make. I also do a lot of cooking, so I was like, "What? That would be so helpful." Because I think my kids, the biggest complaint my kids here at home have with me is that I'm always cooking the same thing. So I have a very
Yeah.
limited repertoire of food, and they get tired of it. I make like lentil soup, some Panamanian dishes, which is where I came from, and it gets a little stale. So I'm looking forward to that app where you can just take a photo of the fridge and it can make something simple. But it's so interesting to see these ideas that are just so different that what you were expecting. It was so interesting to see like the very first thing be chat, and it became so useful that people got super excited about it. And but there's so much more potential. In such the earliest part of what this can do. And speaking of that, you also have different APIs. So it's not just the ChatGPT API that gets right now all of the press, but you have other things. You have the Whisper product as well as Dolly, which I think maybe got more press, but now then ChatGPT just really blew it out of the water. So can you tell me a little bit about, from a developer's perspective, like how different are these things in terms of how you work with them?
Yeah, I think from an actual code perspective, it's all like it all looks the same, which is kind of
Hmm.
nice. So there's nothing like sort of fundamentally different about using these different APIs. A lot of it is like the way that the input data is formatted,
Hmm.
but the code is extremely simple. If you pull up the documentation and we look at some of the examples under the API reference section, um, it's all super simple. We can look at audio, for example, or images,
Sure.
either one. And then on the right hand side where it says curl for the example, scroll up
Yeah.
just a
So
little bit
this
more. Example. Yeah, you can switch it to
yeah.
Python code too if you click on curl
Oops,
up
sorry.
at the top.
Let's see. So you can choose the language here for
Yeah,
how
sorry. At
to.
the like each individual code section, you
Oh,
can
I see.
change the
It actually
language.
zoomed me in. So let's go to audio and then curl. Yeah,
Yes.
you can see the code. Oh, this is pretty cool.
So
So you
super
can
super
actually.
simple. examples of like of how you would integrate this into your technology, into your product, into your service. And I think this is really the part for me that's so interesting, is that what we'll see over the next like 2, 3, 4 years is like ubiquitous access to this AI technology across everybody's
Mhm.
products. And that's really what the API does, is sort of democratize access to AI technology. So you, as the, some company doing X, Y, and Z product or service, you don't need to actually go and spend the time and the money to build these large language models and get all the benefit from it. You can just integrate the API, do a couple things with it, add some features or functionality to your product, without sort of having to do all this crazy development work. And it's literally as simple as like putting in your API key and you're good to go, which is crazy. Um, so yeah,
Yeah, that
like
is so
going back
useful,
to it.
and it is really similar. Like the between the images and the audio, it's just you make a request and you specify some parameters, and then you get a response, and bang, you don't have to build out. A lot of the work, the newer work that we're seeing is like open products and open GPTs, and this is really great for a developer because they don't have to worry about training anything. They just use it for whatever they need. So that is very exciting. I know it feels like something I could definitely get into. So tell us a little bit more about the developer experience. So you say you're talking to somebody who's either in a related industry and is thinking about focusing on GPT work. What sort of things, other than, I mean, this is a fantastic website. I think you have the Playground, which I really haven't gotten a lot into. I did see that you have these different modes that you can get into. So you can go into like chat and then maybe look for some of the different models. I noticed that sometimes you have this GPT 403. And how is this different from the regular Chat GPT interface, and what sort of things can people do here?
Yeah, so the coolest part about the playground is you can sort of modify a bunch of these parameters. So if we set our model to, yeah, we can do GPT 3.5 turbo, we can change the temperature of the model, which changes like the randomness of the outputs.
Hmm.
So in base ChatGPT, you essentially don't have this functionality. You can't change the maximum length. You can't change some of these other attributes like the presence penalty, and which is a little bit more of an advanced use case.
Hmm.
You can also, if you click the X in the top right hand corner or top left hand corner, we can also set the system message, which in ChatGPT is set for you. So
Hmm.
if maybe you want to switch over to GPT-4, it would be a better in the model dropdown if you have, yeah, perfect. So GPT-4 does a great job of respecting the system message and really staying on what you want it to do. So you could basically put anything in here. You could say like, I'm a pirate, or like you should respond as a pirate, end every message in arg matey or whatever you want it to say. Um, and it will
Oh,
actually do
nice.
that, which is crazy to think.
I
We can
see.
see this demo live. Hopefully it works. And then
GPT plugins or something like that. Yeah, so like let's try this out, see what it does. Hard me hard. Oh, that's hilarious.
yeah, and now you could continue to have like go and click add message at the bottom, and then you can add in like another. Um,
I see. It's scrolling a little bit, so I don't know if I can get to it. Also, my screen is set to. Okay, so you can add another quick message here after you start after it started, or continue the conversation, which is the fantastic thing about GPT is that it just the ability to understand context is one of the things that makes it revolutionary. You never were able to have sort of an ongoing conversation with a computer that was that wasn't, maybe you started out with linear kind of ways to solve problems, but the ability of GPT and chat GPT like to be able to remember everything, so it's
you might
really
want to cancel
amazing.
this. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, they're probably
I'm not
thinking,
sure
yeah.
what it was doing. It was in some sequential loop of
Yeah,
just
it's
continuing to
yeah,
generate stuff.
it's done.
There
So
we
now
go.
we could add another message and add some additional commands to everything. Yeah. So this is might be something that, especially for developers, and I know that you can save, do presets and stuff. And then I guess there's like a view code section
Coming
here.
soon. That stuff
Coming
doesn't work
soon.
for this
Yes.
chat mode yet,
Oh, I
but
see.
for
Uh-huh.
the if you switch it to like raw completions or audio or one of those things, you can actually it'll like generate the code for you, and hopefully that'll be available for this chat interface soon as well.
That is super exciting. So, Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your role as a developer advocate, and what do you do day to day besides go on Twitter and try to start like super wars of your YouTube versus GPT.
I try not to spend too much time on Twitter. Honestly, there's just a lot of there's a lot of noise and there's so much work that
Mhm.
has to happen that it's really easy to get distracted from what needs to take place. But a majority of my role is focused on like how can we enable developers to be successful who are building with the API. And now since we just recently launched. ChatGPT plugins, it's sort of a whole new scope of work for me helping developers actually build their plugins and make them available to people sometime soon. Um, so it's a lot of working with people, hearing feedback on what we need to improve with the product, working with our product team, working with our engineering team to make our core product better, and also again provide sort of the documentation and instructions and tutorials and examples for people so that they can really quickly sort of start to build some of these solutions themselves. And
Yeah.
I think it's kind of different than traditional developer advocacy. Like I think normally when I think of developer advocates, I think of like folks who are like, trying to expand the user group of somebody who's like building with a certain product. And I think my role
Mhm.
is more so focused on like how can we make people successful, less so on like going and speaking at events and being like, oh, here's why you should use the OpenAI API, things like that. It's more about like, you're already interested in AI. How could we help make you successful as you actually build something?
So talk to me about how you use ChatGPT or perhaps some of the other products. Like personally, how is it useful for you? Maybe a lot of coding, or it could be other things.
Yeah, the
Because I
best,
use it
so
all
a
the time, so
couple.
I couldn't live without it already. I think my daughter was trying to complain that all the kids in school are trying to use this, and I'm not sure I'm a big fan, and I'm like, ah, don't take it away. I can't live without it anymore. So tell me about your experience. Sorry.
Yeah, a lot of stuff like very helpful for me, like coding things that usually
Hmm.
would have taken me a lot more time to do, just because like I don't have a perfect mental model of like how to use React, for example, and things like
Hmm.
that. So a lot of functionality just like helping me understand all the different code stacks that I'm involved with and looking at every day. But also a lot of feedback on my writing. So like one of the problems that I have personally with my own writing style is that like I write as if I'm talking to somebody. Um,
Hmm.
and this works really well for like my personal writing. Like if I put a blog post up on my, Medium account or something like that, totally fine, no problem with this. When I'm starting to write things in the context of like almost as like a nameless and faceless entity. If I'm like writing
Hmm.
something for the OpenAI documentation, I have a hard time for myself, like putting myself in that third person, like company point of view, and like not as like someone. I love to communicate in that like very
Hmm.
personal way. So I take a lot of the writing that I do, put it into GPT-4, tell it that I'm looking for that specific tone,
Hmm.
and it does a lot of that rewriting for me, which is really, really helpful, and something that I have a hard time doing in my own everyday writing. So it's very useful in that sense. And
That
yeah,
is really amazing. I'm glad you said that because I totally I can relate to that. I started out just I wrote a book, and a lot of the stuff that I did was just writing. For writing, when I started teaching, I realized that exact problem. So that's a fantastic solution. And I think supplementing the individuals and helping them almost like be trained by the AI into becoming a better version of themselves. I think it's one of the ways that's really useful. One of the things for me is English isn't my first language, so I know that my writing isn't as good as it should be. And I love brainstorming with ChatGPT. Just even for a programming problem. A lot of times you can ask it to give you 10 ideas for something. And I think for a human, sometimes you get stuck in that brainstorming mode, and you could just keep going with ChatGPT. You could just say, well, give me 10 more, give me 20 now, give me 50. And then it really kind of unsticks you. I think that one of the things that I found fascinating was that it's almost like the first industry that ChatGPT disrupted was the developer industry. That it actually could be something. We saw, for example, GitHub's, the Copilot tool that now everything's going to be Copilot. But we saw GitHub Copilot be one of the very first things that was disrupted by GPT, and that's really interesting. Now, recently, GitHub Copilot moved away from what used to be called Codex to something that now I imagine uses ChatGPT. I did notice a little bit of pushback on it. Can you talk a little bit about that? The impacts of maybe discontinuing Codex and what you think about the differences between the two.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the full context is we initially put out a note that we were deprecating Codex, and sort of underestimated how much people were actually using Codex, just given the success of all the other models that we have available today. And Codex had always been a free limited beta. It never sort of made it out of that stage in its product development life. So we ended up transitioning and deprecating that model, to have people sort of move over to some of the other models that are being more actively worked on. And yeah, again, people were just a little bit upset, and we sort of underestimated how much people were using it specifically for research. So we ended up, you can still access Codex today if you're part of the researcher access program, but it's not available to the general public as just a model. I was just actually going through, and the examples page of our documentation, I was updating some of those examples to use Text GPT 3, which is one of our text completion models. And basically all of the things that we were doing with Codex, you can do with Text GPT 3. So I literally just swapped out those models, changed the prompt very slightly, and it's able to do the exact same things. Chat, using some of the chat models, very similar. You can do a lot of the same things. You just have to format things in slightly a different way. The prompt looks different. So it's, the functionality is still available. It's just a sort of a different package on top of that functionality. And if you really needed the Codex version, then you're able to make use of it. And I think even for GitHub, they actually have their own separate model that they use that powers some of the new Codex experiences. I think they put out a blog post around making Copilot available for business a few months ago, and with that was like a new model that they made available as well.
A lot of good improvements. What I really found interesting about this change in Copilot was that this is exactly how I have been using ChatGPT to code. Like, I always start with ChatGPT, and I do that process where I brainstorm through the problems before I start writing any code. I just start talking to it about, hey, I'm thinking about building this. It's funny because I often treat it as a person. I don't know if you do this. And it starts writing code, and then you just kind of have not an argument, but you have a discussion about how you're trying to make the code specifically different. And what's interesting is that it really, I don't know if you found this, but it really makes you, I don't know, it trains you to communicate better, because a lot of times, especially when training, you have to remember that you can't assume what people already know. So when you explain something, you have to cover things, very specifically, and making sure that you're not leaving people behind. But when we talk to people, we kind of assume that they know what you know. And I think that happens a lot with regular GPT. And this is where I found, ChatGPT, the old product, more helpful than Copilot in being able to have a conversation. Where Copilot would understand my code, and it could, contextualize my environment and give me code that worked well. I wasn't really appreciating how I couldn't have that discussion. So I'm really happy that you guys moved to this model, because it's exactly how I had been using it in the past.
Yeah, I'm super excited. As a developer, I think what GitHub released with Copilot X is going to be like an incredible opportunity, and like just another sort of 10x of my productivity as a developer. I'm super excited. And I was chatting with some of the leadership at GitHub the other day, and sort of hearing about these plans. And I'm not, I was getting giddy, and I haven't gotten my hands on actually testing any of this stuff out yet. But hopefully I'm on the wait list, and I'll get access soon and can start playing around. I think for me, the thing that I've been wanting the most is the ability to just have GPT-4 review some of my pull requests. I think that would be
Hmm.
so awesome. Um, I always am making like weird typos and like small formatting issues, and to have GPT-4 just like, and I also like get a bunch of people to review my PRs for the documentation, and like three people will review it and nobody will find this like small little spelling or formatting error. And I really think that GPT-4 could do a great job at like fixing those sorts of things for me. So it'll be super awesome to see how developers are able to benefit from this.
Yeah, and I think I heard Satya Nadella say that right now we're getting an inkling of what GPT is going to be able to do for us, how it's going to be able to assist people. One of the things that I dreaded was always like creating a release because I had to document and write something about the release. This is what's new about this release. And GPT does such a great job of just writing those kind of things. I know, like, for these live streams that I'm doing, a lot of the post sort of work is making sure that I have like show notes on what happened during the show. Those were always just, I don't really want to do that. Like, I just wanted to have, prepare for the next show. And those are some things that they just wouldn't get done. Like things that wouldn't normally get done, or maybe your description of the release or your documentation just wouldn't get as much, information. But having something that doesn't just write a lot, but understands what you have done and can help you document it. The way that I think about it is how before we had like 2 day shipping from Amazon, you just had basically a lot less shipping. And once we had that change in technology of being able to ship something that didn't take 4 to 6 weeks, what we ended up with just more the ability of people to do more as opposed to necessarily taking somebody's job. Like, you would have never guessed that we would have had so much more shipping as a
Yeah,
result of better shipping technology. And that's what we have now. People just get stuff faster, better. And
and
so,
Sam said this in the interview with Lex on that podcast, and they were talking about like what's the implication? Are there less software engineers because we have so much more productivity for developers? And I think Sam's quote verbatim was something like, "The world's going to realize what we can do with 10x cheaper costs to like create software with like 10x more people who are able to like write that software." And I think it's not going to end up like something bad for the existing developers. Like developers will still be a premium, awesome job and career to have.
mhm.
You'll just be able to do like so much more than you are today, which I think will be awesome. Like the world needs more software. There's tons of problems that need to be solved. And yeah,
And I think like
I'm
the parts that I don't know, like I just find that now I can do, or I can let it do the parts that I really didn't want to do anyways. Yeah, the
yeah.
release notes and the stuff that was just cumbersome and took you a lot longer. If you're freeing me for that, then I can work on the things that I really enjoy a lot more, and people will benefit. Because I think, like, for example, if you think about a podcast or a stream, show notes are super important. People want to go to the episode and they want to know what was said in the episode. But to write that is just, it takes a long time. And if you don't have like the infrastructure, you can have GPT create something that, does it really quick, and it understood what was said in an episode and it's able to do all that for you. And it makes the difference, and create something that wouldn't have been done because I don't have the staff to write those sort of things. So in the same way, the release notes is a great example of it can write way better release notes, and I didn't want to do them anyways. So that's a fantastic way to help. So I looked at your educational background, which is super interesting. You have a BA in computer science, but you studied law and philosophy, and I'm seeing a lot of that in this industry. That people that join like these teams have a lot of kind of varied experience. What would your advice be for somebody who is looking for, a career creating like the next great AGI? What should they be studying?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the reality is like AGI is going to require that like we have people from all walks of life who have all different types of backgrounds. I was lucky enough that for the undergraduate program that I was a part of, you basically had to get a BA. There was no option to do like a Bachelor of Science, so everyone has a BA, and everyone has the sort of pairing of a world class liberal arts education with like foundational skills like computer science and stuff like that. And for me, the legal aspect was always just interesting, and I think the intersection between technology and the legal space, especially now with all this innovation that's happening in AI, like we need more people who have a technology background and a technology understanding to actually build with this technology. So I think whatever your background is, whatever gets you excited, do that, and there'll be an opportunity for you to have an impact on AGI and in the future, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, so don't discount those. I always say that for me, I've ended up writing a lot more for performance, as you mentioned, than I ever would have thought of somebody, whose language isn't English. That's not what I thought I would be doing. And I always think that the classes that I thought were the most cumbersome for me in school have now become the most useful, and I wish I would have paid more attention.
I totally
So
agree. I
isn't that
growing
weird?
up,
Yeah.
I couldn't stand writing. Like I really just like
Mm,
there was something about writing that like was just so hard for me to wrap my head around. I just remember like my parents like helping me and like all that stuff, like trying to write things. And now when I'm writing about something that I'm excited about and like doing a blog post about some technology, like it comes so easily and it feels so
mhm.
natural to write about that. And it's just so like fascinating to just pause and step back and be like, wow, it's such a different experience than when I was writing about other things at a different part of my life. It's crazy to think.
Yeah, I think that there's something to the fact that when you're sort of doing something you love, it becomes easier when you're excited about communicating, the things that you're interested in. I think that's, I had such a hard time when I first learned English because they were making me read like Shakespeare, and I'm like, this is like an alien language to me. Like I
It
can't
is.
process that structure of Shakespeare or Old English. And but you gave me like a book on Star Trek, and I read it super quick. Or an adventure book, even, Robinson Crusoe or other books that just like interested me. I think that there's something to that once you realize that the skill of writing is the skill of communication, and now that you have some of these tools that can really help you in the parts that you need help with, I think we're going to have just a revolution of more and better communications. I love that Socratic mode. That thing is unbelievable. I hope
Yeah,
more
and
people get a hold of it.
and
That was
the
like,
added layer of this is like the being able to like personalize your education experience to what gets you excited. Like I think if
mhm,
you're like, hey, like the teacher can be like, hey, you're this is something that you're deeply interested in. Let's like modify all of these assignments that I have for this class to make them so that it's like curtailed to this thing that gets you excited. And that's like not like that doesn't scale without AI technology. Teachers,
mm,
if you're a teacher with 30 kids in your class, you can't do that for you can't make custom assignments for every kid in the class if you have to do it by hand. But with this AI technology, you can now give people this experience and people can do what makes them excited. And I think that's going to be like, again, one of these drivers of like people just being like better off and like enjoying education more. There's so many people who the education system has like cut out and left behind because they didn't conform to whatever the specific ways
mhm.
of doing things that the education system is set up to do. And I think that this technology is going to bring a lot of those people back into the circle of who can benefit. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, and it's going to be such a, I don't know, it's a way better experience than I think we perhaps had growing up. I was, in my room with my son, and he like started teaching himself like 3D animation, and I was so proud. In programming, he loves like Scratch programming,
Yeah.
and to see just I don't know, we're really going to be able to change the way that people are able to absorb things to make it more interesting to them, because I think that a lot of that stuff, I don't know. I feel people sometimes forget what it's like not to know something, and the ability to have a technology that can help people with that is fantastic. So, we don't have a lot of time, but we do have some questions. Can you talk a little bit about how people can get help at OpenAI if they have a problem, perhaps? Like I know, so Harrison, for example, said that he tried the code writing tool that's in debug. I haven't had a ton of success, and he still he said this is one of the things we talked about earlier. He's still waiting for the entrance into the plugin program. A lot of people definitely want that to be available. So what can people do today to get get questions answered, especially like technical questions for developers? Where do they go?
Yeah, so we have a developer community forum. It's community.openai.com, and there's thousands of other developers who are also working with our API and technology, and even
Mhm.
plugins. So if you want to be a part of that, it's open to everyone. You can go and post your questions, and we have a bunch of amazing community volunteers who spend a bunch of time helping people who are trying to build and answer questions. So um,
That would be the
definitely,
first
yeah,
place,
exactly.
the community forum. Yeah,
Community
and it's a
forum, and
good
then if
place.
there's
Very
something,
active. Yeah.
yeah, it's super active. Like people are, it's too much for me personally to like try to keep up with all the conversations that are happening. Um, so definitely check out the community forum and ask your question there.
Yeah, people really enjoy your story about your career path. I guess, like I said, people should hear that. That was a great. I don't know. You know, I was like impressed with my applying 3 times, so I'm going to I'm going to take a lot out of that answer. So yeah, I mean, Luis says it's all about persistence. Love it. And I don't know. Agustin is asking a little bit about how can GPT possibly process an image. I guess you already had sort of an engine like Dolly that understood images. The way that I like to think about this is I used to work in a newspaper, and we had when you asked one of the artists to do a portrait of somebody, what they would do is they would basically look for every picture of the person they could find, and if they found any other portraits, they would look at those as well, and then they would create a portrait based on the information that they had from those other portraits. The way that I like to think about it is the compute once we realize that that's actually an algorithm, the ability to look at patterns in things and then be able to duplicate those patterns. Once you teach the computer the patterns, then they're able to replicate the patterns. And there's a lot of places where you can learn more about the concepts of GANs and how they're able to sort of filter the data that they receive and then create something. I don't know if you could add anything to this, Logan.
Yeah, so we actually have an open source technology called Clip, and Clip is basically you can put in images and you can get the sort of description of them already. So that
Mm-hmm.
technology is out there that works. And the way that you can, I think one way of thinking about this, and I'm not actually sure if this is how Clip works behind the scenes, but image segmentation is a machine learning technology that essentially allows you to like take an image, break it down into like the different pieces, like it can detect different objects and stuff like that. And you could imagine you take all of those different objects that are detected in an image, at like the picture of the food in the fridge, for example. You take all those objects, you pass them through a classification layer, which then classifies what those different objects are. And then you take all those things and you put it through a system like Chat GPT, and you now have like, you take that raw list and you turn it into like a natural language statement of what's present in the image. So that I'm guessing that's not actually how it works for Clip and for GPT-4 behind the scenes, but like that's like one way of reasoning about how these systems actually end up working.
Yeah, super interesting. So that I hadn't heard of this product before, so definitely a good place to check things out. Yeah, and thank you so much for the conversation today, Logan. What an honor. I mean, I know that you were a little bit ill last time we tried to do this, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to everyone. I can't wait for what you guys do. I can't wait for seeing some of uh, the potential realized. I'm really surprised. I think I heard in that Lex Friedman podcast, some say something like, "We're just a company that ships. You guys are shipping all the time. A lot of fantastic stuff." And I like the things like the Socratic mode that are pleasant surprises. And I know that you guys are going to continue with that. So again, thank you so much. Just a note: next time we have Dennis Linkoff, and he's going to be talking to us about how the process of development is changing. I know we touched on it a little bit this time with Logan, but he actually has a really great talk on how he ended up building a team using technologies like artificial intelligence, and how that is modifying the way that things are being done in the development industry. So once again, Logan, thank you so much, and we'll
Yeah,
talk to
thanks
you
for
soon.
hosting me. This was awesome.
Awesome. Take care.